Welcome to This Week in Virginia, and a very special welcome to Delegate Mike Cherry, who represents the 66th House District. That number's going to change, but it's a 66 right now, which includes Colonial Heights and part of Chesterfield County. Delegate Cherry served on the Colonial Heights City Council from 2016, 2021 until he came into the General Assembly. He's an administrator in the Life Christian Academy at Life Church. His bachelor's degree is from Liberty University, a master's in education from Regent, and then an education specialist degree also from Regent. And in addition to all of that, right after high school, before some of these other things happened, joined the Air Force and served in the Air Force from 1991 to 2011, retired as a master sergeant. Delegate Cherry, among your many other credentials, you've completed training as a counselor and crisis intervention manager, a volunteer chaplain at the Colonial Heights Police Department, and maybe find a few hours to sleep every now and then in that busy schedule. But we're delighted to have you join us. You're only the second of the new 18, as we're referring to the ones of you just elected, that we hope to have all 18 on before the end of this year to introduce you all to folks throughout the Commonwealth. Folks know you very well in Colonial Heights and in Chesterfield, in the Richmond area, but we want folks from Lee County to Accomack to the Northern Virginia all to meet all of the legislators. Now, my first question is, with all that you're doing, why did you decide to run for the House of Delegates?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to get to come and share just a few thoughts. Why? That came up a lot during the campaign. Why would you choose to do this? You're already so busy. There's already so many other things. You already are an elected official. You're on the local government. You're making a difference in your community. Why would you do this? And I guess that's the biggest answer is I saw a need. I was in a district that had a 32-year incumbent in former Speaker of the House, Kirk Cox. I found out he was retiring. I went and met with him and said, is there someone that's kind of in the pipeline? Have you kind of prepared someone for this role as you go, a succession plan, so to speak? And when I found out the answer was no, being a man of faith, I went and I prayed about it. And I really sought, whether this was something that I felt like that God would have me do. And I heard a resounding yes. And so off we charged into the campaign. And the ultimate why is because I want to make a difference in my community. I love helping people. You mentioned a few of my credentials, and if you go to the root of everything that I do, there's a service component to it, whether that is as a pastor, whether that is an administrator in a Christian school, whether that's as a volunteer police chaplain. Every one of those has a service component to it. And I love helping people and I love serving people. And this is just another step of that. I have 80,000 people that I represent, that I'm responsible for the care, feeding, and making sure that they have everything they need within what the state provides to our community. And so that's why I did what I did. And that's why I'm so grateful for this opportunity.
Well, that it really is a testimony to your public service to be willing to take on another assignment, because even though it's considered part-time, as you certainly knew if you talked to the Delegate Cox, and as you've already experienced, it can take a tremendous amount of time, and it's good that you have some staff. I've talked with Zachary, and I'm sure he's a big help, and others may be a help to you in trying to provide services to your constituents. Go back even an earlier time. Why did you decide to join the Air Force? That was an early decision that you made after high school.
Yes, sir, it was. And again, it comes back to the same reason of this. It was service. And growing up, I'd always wanted to do a couple things. I'd always wanted to be a law enforcement police officer, and I'd always wanted to fly airplanes. And I found out at the time the Air Force wasn't really accepting, people that didn't have perfect vision. And so I was able to find a career that allowed me to fly. I flew in the back end of heavy equipment cargo planes. I loaded the cargo on, took care of passengers in flight, eventually became an airdrop specialist. So all of the people and equipment and all of the things that come out of the back of the airplane, I became an expert in how to deliver those materials. And so I was very blessed to have an extensive career in the Air Force where I was able to travel We visited 6 of the 7 continents in about 75 different countries. And I love to tell people that if they saw it on in those 20 years, I was probably there. Because we got to go to every major conflict from Mogadishu and Somalia to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. I served in all of those combat theaters. And so I had a wonderful time serving our nation through the United States Air Force.
Tell our viewers something about your family, because I believe probably one of your easiest decisions was to propose marriage to a childhood sweetheart. And tell us about your family, Delegate Cherry.
Yes, absolutely. I am married. I've been married for over 30 years, coming up on 31 here very, very quickly, to my beautiful wife, Teresa. We were high school sweethearts. We dated off and on through high school. And once I joined the military, I went away to basic training. And the plan was for us to kind of long distance date. She was going to go to college. I was going to be in the military, hoping to be stationed on the East Coast. And I got my first military assignment, and it was to Washington State. Being from North Carolina, that's a pretty good hop and a long distance relationship. And so my very romantic proposal to her was, I'm going to Washington State. Do you want to go? And she said yes. And I said, the only way that can happen is if we're married. So I guess we're going to have to get married. You need to plan a wedding. So 31 years later, it was appropriate. We've got 2 great kids. My son is following in his father's footsteps. He's active duty Air Force. He is married. They have a wonderful daughter named Jovi. They're stationed here in Virginia over at Hampton at Langley Air Force Base. And my daughter is actually a teacher at my Christian school. And so that's our little family unit. And I love every bit of being a father and a husband and now a grandfather to my beautiful granddaughter, Jovi.
Now, Colonial Heights City Council, you'd been there for a while. You were serving in other capacities in the city, in your community. What really... I'm sure it was service, but what else would you say about what really encouraged you to run for city council?
As I said, I'm originally from North Carolina. I landed here in the city of Colonial Heights in 2006. We actually moved to Virginia in 2004. We lived in Dinwiddie for a couple of years. I moved to the city. And we had a situation where right next to where I live, if the people who are listening or watching are familiar with Colonial Heights, it's where the Colonial Heights courthouse is. And at the time, it was actually a Baptist church when I moved in. And eventually the church built in a new location, moved, and the city purchased the property. And they didn't really have a plan with what to do with the property. They just knew they wanted control. They wanted to make sure that whatever came in fit, kind of the planning district and everything that was in the city. And so I actually volunteered for a committee, a steering committee, if you will, to help the city decide what to do with the property. And that kind of got me involved with the local politics of the area. I got to meet a lot of people, business owners, city councilmen, and really saw that what I felt like was a lack of leadership. A lot of times in small town communities, you can get that feel of this is the way we've always done it. And being from someone that wasn't from here, I kind of brought a different perspective to the community, having been and seen and done so many different things and served the nation in so many different ways. I thought I could add to our community. And so that's what prompted me to run, was just seeing kind of the need for leadership here in the local level, and which has now led me to see, obviously, we need some help with some leadership at the state level as well. So that's what's kind of led that path.
So let's move right into the state level and give us some of your reflections about the 60-day session. And we can talk some about reconvene coming up and about the special session, but what about the 60 days? What, as you look back on it, not having ended just a little over a month ago, what would you say about the session?
One, it was an absolute blast. As you'll note from my biography that you kind of started with, I'm a lifelong learner. And so being able to come into a new situation where I'm really the new guy and to learn so many different things, learn about policy, about procedure. Being on city council, we operate under Robert's rules. In the House of Delegates, we operate under Jefferson's rules. So there's so many new things to learn. And I love that aspect of being the delegate, is to learn everything. I am very gregarious. I love people. I'm an extrovert to the nth degree. And so getting to be around so many new and exciting people, so many people that I can learn so much from. You look at a Delegate Freitas, that speaks so competently about conservative values and ideals. And man, what a great guy to learn from. And then to have a mentor, like Kirk in the house that can impart so much knowledge, learning from Mr. Speaker, and learning about how the policies and procedures work within the confines of the caucus, and why we support the ideals that we do, and how we go about affecting change. And so I have thoroughly enjoyed the whole session process because I loved learning about all of those different things. Obviously, we didn't get everything accomplished we had hoped for. We have another chamber, as many of you know, in Richmond, and it's called the Senate. And they declared themselves the big blue wall, and that they were going to kill all of our legislation. And unfortunately, many really great policies that we espoused and presented to them, they did strike down ultimately. And so, again, the learning aspect of learning how to deal in relationship with people and how to get your ideals accomplished, because you can build a coalition of support, it's fun. It's fun because I get to hang out and meet so many new people. But I loved it. Can't wait to get back. We will be back next Wednesday for reconvene session. It's supposed to be a one-day session, but it's going to be a very, very, very long day. We're looking at over 100 bills that the governor has recommended amendments to. There are 26 vetoes that he passed down that we get to deal with and decide if we're going to override or recommend changes, or however that process works. And then we have new bills that are coming out. As yesterday, the gas holiday tax bill was voted out of committee and will now come to the House floor to be voted on by the entire body here next week. So super excited about coming back for reconvene next Wednesday.
You mentioned at one point in telling us about how things are going, about working with other people. And I think as people will check on the issues that you raised for consideration during this session, one that really jumps out to many people is House Joint Resolution number 9, that has to do with the ability of people, the right to vote. And you reached out to some of your colleagues. I'm sure some of them reached out to you. And if anyone clicks on that resolution now, they'll see that you're the chief patron. There are 3 other Republican patrons, and there are 4 Democratic patrons who come together on an issue that's of concern to many people. So tell us something about that resolution, about the process it will take in the next year or two.
Yes, sir. So for context, I guess, for those of your readers or listeners that don't go back and click on it and see, this was the voter rights restoration to those that were released from incarceration. So Virginia is one of 2 states that permanently disbars anyone convicted of a felony from ever voting again. And there's been a wave movement over the course of the last decade, maybe, that states have undone that. Really with the ideology that constitutional rights are vested to us by God. The Constitution recognizes them, but really the rights come from God. And voting is one of those fundamental rights that we think everyone should have access to. Yes, they committed a crime. Yes, there was a punishment for that crime, but the court did not mete out a life sentence for them. So I don't think that Virginia should mete out a life sentence on them in terms of their voting rights. And what I found was, though there are some within the Republican Party that staunchly oppose that, it's a very, very big group of us that really think this is a fundamental right and should be restored as quickly as possible. Now, in Virginia, they can get their rights back, but it's kind of an arbitrary and capricious process based upon the courts and or the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, Bob McDonald started a very liberal restoration of rights that was followed through with the last 2 governors. I'm anxious to see how Governor Youngkin is going to approach that in terms of rights restoration. But I think it should be a fundamental right that should be restored as quickly as possible. And the way it works here in Virginia is that this would be a constitutional amendment. So the way constitutional amendments work is you have to vote on it and pass it. There has to be an intervening election, and then it has to be voted on and passed again. At that point, it will go on the ballot in the next election cycle, for the people of the Commonwealth of Virginia to tell us whether they agree with that fundamental constitutional change or not. And so it was voted on in 2020. 2021, it passed. There was an intervening election. We took over the House, and it had to be passed again during this last session in 2022. If it had, it would have gone on the ballot in November. It did not ultimately pass. There were some objections to some of the way it was worded. It could not be changed. It could not be edited. It could not be amended. It had to be voted on in exactly the same format twice. And so in essence, we're back to the starting block. We'll be bringing that resolution again in the next session in a little bit different format. Bringing in some language that I think more in the conservative caucus will be willing to support. Having great talks with leadership, including Mr. Speaker, that they think they want to get this done, can support it, but we've got to change a little bit of the verbiage of the way it was voted on before. And so still believe that is a fundamental right, still believe that is something that is important, and we'll fight for the restoration of that as long as I'm in Richmond. And I think we'll be able to get it through this year. So I'm super excited about that.
It was a very thorough explanation that someone certainly would understand the process. And it is sometimes thought to be cumbersome, but it's what the law is, that it has to be the exact same language. And I've seen other proposed constitutional amendments fail just as this one did, because people said, well, we've thought about it, we want the language a little different. So Delegate Cherry and others will be looking at this in the 23 session. Then if it passes, there's an election in the fall of 23, then you'd have to vote on it again in 24. And so in the fall of 24, this could be on the ballot if it moves on forward. But before our time would end, tell us about your committees and about the work on committees and how that's been going too.
So that was one of the other very big learning experiences of what it was like to be in Richmond, is the idea that much of the work that gets accomplished at the committee level. I am very blessed that the Speaker gave me some great committee assignments. I serve on county, cities, and towns, which, being in local government as a city council, I think certainly fits my understanding of how impactful that can be for the state and how we dictate what localities can and can't do. Again, for your listeners, we are what's known as a Dillon Rule state. And so no locality can do anything unless specifically granted permission by the assembly to do that. And so we saw a lot of proposed amendments. Some were good, some were bad. We voted some in, we shot some down. But I loved being on that committee because of my experience and background being on city council. I serve on health, welfare, and institutions, which was not necessarily in my wheelhouse, but something I certainly enjoyed learning about. I had a large learning curve in that committee, but great mentors like Roxanne Robinson, who is my mentor as assigned by the caucus. Each of us new guys got a mentor. Roxanne is mine. She did a great job of helping me understand, her being an optometrist, many of the laws and rules and regulations that we were undertaking, including one that benefited her profession, her former profession. She's retired now, but love that aspect. And then the other one I serve on that I think is very, very important is education. As an educator, I feel like I have a great insight into what's going on both in the public and the private schools, the challenges that education faced coming off this pandemic. We, in essence, lost 18 months of education. We have a large learning loss that needs to be addressed, and being able to affect some changes within the legislature that can send that down through the Department of Education to make a difference in our kids' lives at the basic fundamental level of learning, I think is very important. And getting us back to the focus of what education should be: reading, writing, arithmetic, maybe getting away from some of the social justice type issues that were being pushed down into education that I don't think really belong there. We passed some good legislation in terms of parents and making sure that they had an input into what's going on in their kids' schools. Now the governor signed one of the bills that says that if there's sexually explicit material that's going to be presented in a classroom, then the parents have to be notified of that and have to be given an alternate assignment if they choose that that's not appropriate for their student at the proper grade level that's being presented at. And so I think that's very important, is that we get the control back to the parents of what's going on in our public schools and making sure they have a voice in their kids' education. So I really enjoy my committee assignments. I'm grateful for the ones I was assigned by the speaker. And I think I'm going to be very effective in those places because of my background and because of my skill set.
So go back to right at the beginning when I said you represent the 66th House District. The numbers change, the geography changes a little bit. In Southwest and South side of Virginia, where they've lost population, they change significantly. So tell the people around the Commonwealth, what's your district number going to be, and how has it changed as far as Colonial Heights and part of Chesterfield?
So the district number will change from 66 to 74. 74 will be the new district number for down here. The 66 was radically altered in 2018 when there was a court case that there was a ruling by a liberal judge in California that the district was gerrymandered. And so they took a pen and they redrew it and made it from a very conservative district into a lean left district. Demographics for the district I run in was actually a D+6. So the Democrats had about a 6-point advantage to try to take back this seat here in the 66th. And so with the redraw, I get back much of what was Delegate Cox, Speaker Cox's traditional district. It does get to where it's much more conservative district. And I will be representing what Speaker Cox did for most of his career. And so it has become a conservative seat once again. And I'm grateful for the support that I had to win in a very, very competitive, difficult seat, and to now have that same level of support for what I think is a more conservative, safer seat, as long as we continue to represent the people of our district. And I plan on doing that and doing that very well.
Delegate Mike Cherry, thank you so much for being a guest on This Week in Virginia. Best to you. People, if they pass through the Pocahontas building, they can look right into your office. And soon you'll be out of that building into another one, but for a short time still in Pocahontas. And we look forward to seeing you on Reconvene Day. And thank you again for being with us.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Look forward to seeing you in Richmond.